What was your biggest, we need to leave now moment? Story 1. In Scotland, a friend and I were exploring an abandoned hospital, which was set out through a bunch of joint buildings. All the windows and doors were boarded up, aside from one place where we could squeeze in past the loose board. The layout meant that once we were in through there, we had access to pretty much the entire main building. It was darker than the night inside when we had to remember the wing we'd entered from. We had flashlights, so it wasn't too daunting. But then we stumbled upon this room where a lot of cool stuff was left behind. Beds, filing cabinets, and such. We wanted to capture some pictures, so we flicked off the flashlights to utilize the camera's flash. We kept at it for about 10 minutes, glimpsing the room solely in the camera's bright flash. Everything seemed fine, until both of us gradually tuned into the sounds. Usually an abandoned spot is quiet, just the drip of water and the odd creak of wind. But now we heard floors creaking, doors groaning, and the occasional scrape of clang of metal against the floor. It pretty much seemed like someone was fumbling around in the dark. The building's layout means we have to backtrack toward the source of the noise to return to our entry point. There's just one way. As fear started to grip us, we cautiously walked through the rooms again, pausing every now and then to listen. Eventually, we reached the side hallway we entered, and in a rush, we ran towards the door at the end, finally daring to switch on the flashlights and making some noise. But it's the wrong door. We stood there, the footsteps drawing nearer. Frozen in place, we were trapped in the darkness, feeling really concerned. If whoever or whatever is making that noise enters this narrow passage, we're in trouble. We waited, listening intently, holding our breaths. The scraping and shuffling draw closer, passing by slowly, then gradually fading away. After a brief pause, we cautiously exit the hallway, slipping back into the main building. Carefully, we walk to the adjacent hall, where a faint glimmer of light peeks through the loose board. Stealthily, we inch our way toward it. Suddenly, an almighty scraping and banging erupted behind us, as if someone had toppled one of the huge metal filing cabinets. Loud doesn't even cover it.
"Time to go!"
I yelled, and we dashed for the door, the distinct sound of footsteps right in our heels. We launched ourselves through the loose board and down the overgrown path, stealing a quick glance backward. Though the gap revealed nothing, we didn't stick around to see if that would change. Their fight or flight response is the only thing that saved them there. Makes you wonder if some places are just better left undisturbed. Story 2. I used to drive for Lyft. Back in April 2018, around 1:30 a.m., I picked up a young couple from a bar. They seemed pretty relaxed, and I thought it'd be my final ride for the night. The guy requested to stop at a corner store on our way to their destination to grab some cigarettes. I didn't mind waiting, so I pulled over and had a pleasant talk with a young woman while he was inside. It took about 5 minutes, as it seemed everyone was scrambling to snag their last-minute pre-2 a.m. beer. When he came out, he requested a detour to a spot that was the opposite way of their original destination, but just about a mile off. He mentioned wanting to meet up with friends real quick and grab some beer. Figuring it might be my final ride that night, I thought, well, why not? And drove him over there. I know our town quite well, but the route we took to that place was on my usual way there, so when I turned onto the street for their destination, I missed the entrance to the complex parking lot. Since the roads were empty, I stopped and asked them if they preferred parking on the street or pulling into the complex. That's when things changed. The two of them started arguing. He suddenly wanted to head in and hang out for a bit, while she was against the idea. She just wanted him to do whatever he had to and leave so they could head home. And then something hit my car. The sound was unmistakable, so I immediately scanned my surroundings to identify its source. But that couldn't have been it, since there were no other cars on the road. I moved on to the next item on my mental checklist. What could it be if something didn't hit us? But that didn't add up either, as I had stopped and couldn't have collided with anything. It was at this moment that the young lady's attitude changed entirely. She glanced around and then said, "Can we just leave? It hurts and I want to go home." This struck me as odd because she'd been in my car for about 10 minutes and hadn't mentioned any discomfort. Then she added, "It hurts and I can't move," placing her hand on her back and pulling it out, now covered in red. What on earth? The guy began panicking, assuming something in my trunk had blown up, yet it was empty. As he leaned over to assist her, I spotted something white protruding from the seat. It wasn't there earlier that night, so I inquired about it. He tugged on it, revealing a piece of the seat's stuffing. It emerged from the hole that had been made in the seat, because she was just fired at. The moment he grabbed that fuzz, we both had the same realization. He slammed his door shut and I rushed him straight to the hospital, just a couple of miles away. That sudden understanding, followed by the chilling thought of, well, someone could still target you while you're sitting here, was one of the most terrifying moments I'd ever experienced. Story 3. I was traveling with my 22-year-old cousin on a Greek island last May as part of our trip. We enjoyed taking random walks outside the towns we stayed in to explore the surroundings. While returning from one of these walks, we were on a lengthy, narrow road bordered by beaches on each side. A small green car drove past us in the same direction we were walking and stopped about 50 to 100 yards ahead, just idling on the road. We thought, maybe they're just admiring the view. We kept walking, and when we reached the car, the passenger window on our side was down, and the man was staring at us through the mirror. As soon as we passed, the car moved forward, driving past us once more. Right after the green car passed us again, a large truck drove past again in the same direction and aligned itself with the green car. They both paused for a moment, clearly engaged in conversation. The green car hurried off while the black truck moved a bit farther ahead and then stopped on the same side of the road once more. We're on this narrow road with no way to turn around because the town was in the opposite direction. Behind us were just beaches and a few houses. The black truck stopped on our side of the road. As we approached, the driver opened both the front and back doors of the cab but didn't do anything else. They just stood outside the truck, mostly gazing back in our direction. It felt incredibly sketchy. Both cars were obviously keeping an eye on us, watching and communicating in some way. As we approached the truck, we quickly veered off the road and descended onto the beach. We moved as far away from the road as the beach permitted, picking up our pace. The man from the truck crossed the road and, from the side of the beach, observed us through binoculars. We ran until we caught up with another couple, trailing behind them back into town. Meanwhile, I noticed the same green car passing us multiple times as we ran parallel to the road along the beach. Finally, we reached our apartment safely and secured our doors by locking and tying them up, both the balcony and the hall. Our Greek gap year trip almost turned into something out of the movie Taken. This goes to show that even the sunniest paradise can hold some darkness underneath. Did their experience make you feel a little uneasy? I wouldn't blame you. Story 6 also involves 2 people, and it will make you think twice before walking in the woods at night. Story 4. I was hanging out with a couple of friends, waiting for an Uber on the outskirts of Atlanta around 10 p.m. After leaving a nearby restaurant, we were having a casual conversation, debating which bar to head to next. Suddenly, a disheveled old man approached, standing a few feet behind one of my friends. He struck a peculiar pose for about 2 to 3 minutes, all the while gazing in our direction. There was no one else nearby. Afterward, he walked away without saying a single word. He came back a few minutes later and settled down on the sidewalk, about 5 feet from us. At this stage, I was curious if he needed something from us, as there seemed to be no other rationale for him to sit so close on an empty sidewalk. Shortly after, a small sedan pulled into a nearby parking lot, positioning itself behind some bushes in the spot closest to us and farthest from any of the shops in that lot. I noticed it because they happened to be facing that direction. I then saw 6 guys getting out of the sedan and promptly heading across the street directly towards us. It dawned on me that no shops or restaurants were still open nearby. It suddenly struck me that the weird old man earlier might have been sizing us up when he was watching us before, and he returned to somehow mark us. We were all dressed up, smartphones in hand with visible watches, basically the fanciest gear we had for a night out. Just as I began suggesting that we should head back toward where the other people were, our Uber pulled up to the curb. As we drove away, I witnessed those 6 guys huddling in a circle at the spot we had just been standing, then crossing the street again and returning to their car. I'll never have a definitive answer, but I'm pretty sure we were about 10 seconds away from some unfortunate shenanigans. Story 5. While at a mall in Indonesia, I noticed 2 tourists struggling to communicate with a cashier at a bookstore. I stepped in and offered to help translate for them. They wanted to express their gratitude by buying me drinks, but I declined, explaining that I had to get back to my mom soon. Despite my refusal, they insisted on inviting me for dinner. I mentioned I had to eat at home. Then they suggested I sneak out and meet them after dinner. At this point, a staff member from the bookstore sensed something was wrong and went to question them. My sister and I dashed off while they were distracted. We continued wandering around the mall and noticed they were still trailing us. To test if our suspicion was justified, we entered a lingerie store, thinking 2 men wouldn't typically need to shop together in such a store. Surprisingly, they followed us inside. We sprinted back to the jewelry store where our mom was stationed. The store had imposing security guards, and it seemed that their presence prevented those guys from following us any further. My sister and I were just grade schoolers when this happened. Story 6. It was early 2019 and I was with my ex-girlfriend, walking through the woods near my house as we frequently did. We were having an intense argument over something trivial when I caught sight of something through the trees. Off the trail where we walked, it was a man wearing a dark top and blue jeans. People frequented these woods, but what struck me as odd was that this man wasn't on any trails. He was in the middle of the dense overgrowth. I made the mistake of telling my girlfriend to be quiet, not the best move, especially during an argument, which only angered her further. I told her again, instructing her to look in the direction I was focused on. Initially, she didn't catch sight of what I was referring to, so I told her to look for something blue, as the man's jeans were the most noticeable. Then she spotted him, a man walking through the overgrowth, trailing behind us. I had no idea who this guy was, but he appeared older. Regardless, I wasn't willing to take any chances, especially with my girlfriend present. I urged her, saying, "Let's go, we need to leave," and we picked up our pace. The problem was, we were in the middle of nowhere, far from any exits. Plus, to be honest, my girlfriend at the time wasn't particularly physically fit, so walking fast was challenging for her. We walked as fast as she could manage, and I kept glancing behind us. That old man was still trailing us through the overgrowth, clearly trying to stay concealed. Eventually, we exited the woods and never returned there together. I went back to that place numerous times alone and encountered someone who resembled the old man, but I couldn't confirm if it was the same person. They always observed from a distance, never making any moves besides following. I've spotted this person a total of 3 times. Spooky. Story 7. I was at the train station waiting to pick up a friend. Since I arrived early, I chose to stand in the sun just outside the station. A man with a bicycle approached, asking in broken English about the train's arrival time. Once I answered his question, he stayed and struck up a conversation with me. I understand that his questions and attitude may not have been strange, but something about his behavior and appearance gave off a creepy vibe. Eventually, he asked if I could walk with him while he dropped off his bicycle. Given that the bicycle storage area at the station was quite secluded, and honestly, not wanting to be alone with this guy, I declined and hurriedly walked into the station. Then things took a drastic turn. He began yelling at me and calling me names. However, at that very moment, the train arrived, bustling with activity, so he left, leaving the scene. A few months later, I came across an article in the local paper detailing an incident of a woman being violated at the station. They attached a drawing of the perpetrator since he hadn't been caught yet, and it was the same guy. To this day, I'm extremely relieved that I didn't go with him. Always trust your gut instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Do you have any close calls with danger that you'd like to share? Tell me about them in the comments. And if you want to watch more terrifying stories, then don't forget to subscribe to my channel today. Story 8. About 3 months ago, there was an incident in my office park. It turned out my next-door neighbor, who I thought was an Amazon seller, was actually involved in something else entirely. He was robbed and roughed up, but his partner arrived during the robbery. When the robbers left, his partner opened fire on their cars in the parking lot. It was shocking to discover that my neighbors weren't Amazon resellers but were involved in something much more serious. During the robbery, I felt a wave of nausea and an urgent sense to flee. I left and was about to pass by their place when a strong intuition urged me to return inside to use the restroom. While I was there, my heart raced, and an unsettling feeling lingered, although I couldn't pinpoint the cause. I ended up trembling and practically hyperventilating, accidentally dribbling on my leg due to the anxiety. Then the sound of shots erupted. 2 bursts. I immediately dropped to the floor and sought shelter in the bathroom. When I eventually emerged, the parking lot was crowded with people. The air was thick with the smell of gun smoke, but thankfully everyone was unharmed. I ran all the way home, covering a distance of 2 miles. Reviewing the security footage later revealed that I passed in front of my neighbor's partner twice while he was waiting in his car, planning to ambush the robbers. If I did not return to use the restroom, I might have found myself directly in the middle of the chaos. Additionally, if I'd acted on my initial feelings and left immediately, I could have avoided the situation entirely. However, the delay in leaving probably spared me, as going back to use the restroom potentially prevented me from being in the line of fire. Story 9. I used to bartend in our local city, which was relatively small but still urban. It was known for its safety. People could leave items like chairs and blankets in the park without disturbing them. However, many years ago, servers and bartenders often encountered attacks on their way home from their shifts. This was because we carried cash and lacked sufficient parking in the city. No one wanted to pay the exorbitant $30 daily parking fees, so we often had to walk over a mile to reach our cars. It was a daunting experience. One night as I headed to my car around midnight, I realized I was being followed. The streets were typically deserted at that hour, except for the lone stranger enjoying a smoke outside a bar. Being a petite girl, I felt completely defenseless, with nothing but a towel on my head. Every time I walked faster, so did the stranger. I crossed the street when I did, etc. Then I happened to come across a couple walking. I sped walked until they were in earshot and I whisper yelled, "I think I'm being followed. Help me." They changed their pace without missing a beat, so I immediately walked with them. They both put their arms around me and made sure not only that I got to my car, but also that I was in it. They waited until I drove out of sight to ensure I wasn't being followed, as the person ended up in the same parking lot where I was parked. I'll never forget them as long as I live. I can only imagine the fear she must have felt, walking alone in the dead of night with a predator breathing down her neck. Good thing the couple proved that not all strangers have bad intentions. Story 10. When I was young, a friend and I often took walks around our small town of about 5,000 people. We frequently headed to the cyber cafe to meet friends, often opting for different streets to keep our journeys interesting. As we were about to head from one of the side streets toward Main Street, a man on a bicycle approached us. He got off his bike and engaged in some small talk, asking a few casual questions. However, something felt off about him. He appeared to be in his mid-40s. Though my friend and I were slowly inching away, we didn't want to seem rude, so we answered his questions about the weather or traffic. Then, as we tried to excuse ourselves, he paused and said something creepy that I'll never forget. "I don't want to get in trouble, but I need someone. I just need you. You should come with me." He began to ramble on and it made our stomachs sick. Terror gripped me. I couldn't even speak. I grabbed my friend's hand and turned away. We sprinted the rest of the way to the cafe, and as soon as we were inside, we urgently asked to use the phone. I called my mom to pick us up, while my friend informed the worker about what had happened and described the man. Within a month, I got my first cell phone. That experience stayed in our minds, reminding us to always stay cautious, especially when walking the streets. Story 11. Our friend and I, both women, were meeting up for the first time back home from college. We picked a beautiful day in the middle of winter to have lunch outside and stumbled upon an empty park. As we sat at a picnic table, engrossed in catching up, I noticed a scruffy-looking guy driving a large work van with no rear windows pulling into the parking lot. Initially, I didn't pay much attention to him, but I observed that he was moving around outside the van, often glancing in our direction. Eventually, he walked down the sidewalk toward us, passing by our picnic table. He walked around the back of the restroom building, seemingly surveying the area, especially looking down the hill on the other side of it, a clear sign of casing out the place. As he returned to his van, my friend and I discussed our next steps. I observed him opening the back of the van and rummaging around, then made a call on his cell phone. Shortly after, another male arrived in a different car. The two started conversing, and the first guy discreetly pointed in our direction. They quickly started walking towards our direction, making my friend and I gather what remained of our lunch and hastily walk away from the area while keeping a vigilant eye on them. It was one of those moments where I could literally sense the hair on the back of my neck standing up. While it might have been nothing, I strongly believe even now that they had something planned. I'm glad that we decided to leave. Story 12. One late summer afternoon, I was at the bus station near my house. Most businesses were closed and the street was devoid of many cars. A guy passed in front of me. Then 2 minutes later, he passed by again, eyeing me suspiciously. Alarms started blaring in my head, screaming for me to leave and get the hell out of there. However, I ignored it since the bus was scheduled to come in 10 minutes. The third time he passed, he charged at me, pushing me against the wall with his out. I froze for a few seconds, then instinctively began punching and kicking him. Somehow I managed to break free and the rest is history. Always trust your instincts, guys. Story 13. The owner of a Mexican restaurant threw out 2 hammered farm workers from the bar to the parking lot. They tried to start a fight but mostly just leaned on each other, right in front of the picture window with a police packed. One of them rushed to his truck and sped off. I said to my wife, "Time to go, honey." She asked, "What?" I replied, "Those troublemakers aren't finished, and I'm not sticking around for when the worst case scenario happens." We left and not long after, it did take place. Story 14. We were playing basketball in a rough neighborhood. At one point, one of the guys we were playing with turned really aggressive. He said, "Why do boys leave now? We ain't messing with you. You need to leave." Then suddenly became really aggressive to us. Later on, I noticed a black BMW circling around the playground but didn't think much of it. That's when all his friends began insulting us and pushing us, trying to force us to leave. It was strange because we played with them every weekend, and I even provided a free tutorial to one of their brothers. We left, irritated. That playground was fantastic, and it felt awesome to play with those tough guys, given that we were nerdy white boys. About 15 minutes after we left, the black BMW fired at them. There were multiple casualties, and it was a chaotic scene. They did them a favor by driving them off. In the concrete jungle, bullets do not discriminate. Even the innocent can get caught in the crossfire. How's that for a final story? I know you want to keep watching, so check out, what's the scariest true story you know? Story 4 will make you dread the night. See you there.